Welcome back, everyone, to another exciting episode of Anno Talk, all things anodizing. Hello, Dr. Giorgio. How are you this fine and lovely day?
I am having a terrible day, Mr. Mark Spencer. I stayed out late at a friend's concert last night, which was great, but I'm really dragging today. So I have been instead of doing the work I'm supposed to be doing, reading this book that just came in the mail, Aluminum Surfaces by it's all blurred out, but Aluminum Surfaces by Mr. Bill Zahner. Our listeners might recall that we had him as a guest previously on this podcast.
That's outstanding. Have you cracked it at all?
How about you, Mark? How are you doing? Oh yeah, no, I've gotten past the first few pages, and there are a few things that I was not aware of, and I'm gonna have to look into some of these things.
There you go. That's good. You know, when a book creates that thought process and gets you talking with the author, that's pretty exciting. That's a good book.
It really is. It is. So how about you, Mark? How are you doing today?
You know, it's the end of the day. We're near the finish line, and we're going to make it unscathed today, hopefully. Knock on wood.
Right? Sounds great.
Yeah. Well, we have an exciting topic today, and a good friend and someone that's been in this industry for quite a long time. His name is Dan Bishopp. Hi, Dan.
Gentlemen, hello.
Hey, good morning. Good morning. It's afternoon. Boy, did I just mess that up, right? And this is one and done, so we just keep on marching.
It is okay.
Yes. So Dan, tell us a little bit about yourself. You've been around. You and I have worked together, and we've collaborated over the years. But besides that, yeah, give us a background on who you are.
Who am I? Well,
besides a gentleman in a great hat.
You know, it's always important to have a good hat, Mark. Who am I? You know, I'm someone that's been in the industry a long time, and I mean the industry, I mean the extrusion industry and the finishing industry. You know, going back to my days in Kentland, Indiana, when before actually even the Bonnell company bought the plant, it was called Capital Products in Kentland, Indiana, and I started there in June of 1981.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was 20 years old, and I was my first job there was I was a racker on the horizontal paint line. So it was like it was a horizontal liquid line,
right?
And you had to move along as it went, and you had this armful of metal that you hung with a partner, and that was my first job in the aluminum extrusion industry.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So it was not glamorous work, but it was work at the time. And for those of you that weren't around in the early 80s, you know, unemployment was very high due to interest rates and other things. So I was just happy to have a job.
Right.
Yeah. So
go ahead.
So anyway, Capital Products had their own window and door line, but they also did third-party work as well. So you know, it's just at that time it was just 2 presses and the paint line.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So you started as a racker there. Did you move up the ranks there?
Well, I actually, you know, I became a hand spray painter, right? So you know, where we had the Ramsburg guns that went up down, but we had the handguns to touch up with. So I did, you know, I probably got like $1 more an hour or something to be able to do that. You know, so we did that for 2 or 3 years, and then Bonnell kind of became more involved with Capital Products, you know, buying them and things. So one day I learned of this project that they were going to put in an anodizing line in Kentland, Indiana. Now, I had to go to the dictionary to find out what it was, because I had no idea, right? But for a young person at the time had young children. It looked I did. I mean, I had 3 kids by then, George.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Anodizing looked like something that I could learn and that I might be able to, you know, have a different pathway than my pathway was at that particular time.
Okay. So what did, when they were talking about putting an anodized line in, did you move over then to lead the effort of the installation, or?
No.
Okay.
But I was friends with the person in the plant who got the job as the first lab technician.
Right.
And but I bid, it was a union shop, and I bid as a racker.
Right.
Because it was a seniority awarded, and so I went over and I racked aluminum and anodizing, and worked my way up to be a manual crane operator. Again, George, I think we're talking about a 50-cent an hour raise or something like that.
Yeah.
And then when the opportunity came to move into the lab,
Right.
that was something I wanted to do. Probably 3 years had passed by then, but you gotta earn your opportunities, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I spent 7 years in the lab.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So got to know a lot of the suppliers, got to know worked on a lot of process improvement. And one of the things unique about that plant, it had an 8,000 gallon bright tip tank. Mark, you might remember those days.
Wow.
You might remember those days. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
massive. And we supplied the aluminum running board industry, of northern Indiana and southern Michigan, and even actually into Toronto and area a little bit. We did millions of square feet of those aluminum running boards through Bright Dip, and that was along with shower door industry was probably 70-80% of that anodizing market at that particular time. Yeah. And then at the same time as they put in the anodizing line, Kentland also put in a vertical paint line. So they actually put in 2 products so that they could expand into a market industry you used to know well as the wood clad window market. Yeah. So that was kind of became the bread and butter of that plant back then, was the shower door industry, the running boards, and then the wood clad industry for paint.
You were involved also with your experience in the lab. I mean, you were running the line there, were you not?
Well, so what happened then is after 7 years, the opportunity came for me to move more into frontline supervision. And I had some people that were vendors, and Ernie Witham was someone from my past that was like a father to me, that mentored me in anodizing. And there's a couple people within the plant that suggested that maybe I should continue to learn and see if I can get a degree at the same time, because I did not have a college degree at that particular time.
Right.
So I started when I was a supervisor. I started going to a night school at Purdue.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And Bonnell paid for it. So
that's great.
Yeah, through the reimbursement program, right? So
Right.
yeah, and back then, this was before the days of internet learning. So you actually, again, telling my age enough, right? I actually had to drive there and go to class and all that type of stuff. But at Purdue, they had a nighttime program, particularly for adult students, that was kind of around organizational leadership. So that's actually the studies that I pursued, was actually organizational leadership. And yeah, somewhere along that line, I moved up from frontline supervision to manager of the anodizing line. Becoming the first person actually in the history of that plant that started out as a floor worker that ended up as a manager.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then we just got more exposure from there. We got involved in some waste treatment projects, both in Kentland and in Noonan. If any of you have been to Noonan, Georgia, and Bonnell, the RO system they have there, that was certainly something we were part of back in the day to become as close to zero discharge as possible. And then I just worked my way up into being a paint manager and environmental manager and packaging manager, all of the same, right?
That's it. Yeah.
For probably another one of those 50 cents an hour.
Yeah.
So, but you know, it gave me a lot of exposure, you know, to the vendors such as Benchmark, who you know, Houghton ended up buying. Plus the guys with Henkel, and you know, certainly Glenn Shaner from the bulk side and the paint pre-treatment was someone that was a good mentor and friend as well. So you know, we've had a lot of people willing to help us along the way.
Sure, sure. So how did you make the leap from being an applicator to now? Did you go right to becoming a supplier? No,
so I was a manager at Kentland, you know, managing these waste treatment projects. I'm managing the paint line. No, Mark, I think you probably remember me at that time, you know, going to Iowa or Minnesota or Wisconsin, you know, for the wood clad window industry. So it wasn't, you know, just from one leap to another, but, you know, I'd gotten to the point where, you know, going in the same door every day, regardless of my, you know, amount of successes, you know, was something I probably didn't want to do the rest of my life, right? So we were able to get more into a divisional role, and I moved to Noonan, Georgia. So yeah, so I worked on the Hill in Noonan. You know what I'm talking about, Mark.
I know the Hill.
You know, for 3 or 4 years, and I was looking at the processes between plants as far as anodizing, as far as environmental packaging and pre-treatment and paint along that way. So, you know, and then we would try to negotiate supply agreements, you know, with Houghtons of the world or the PPGs of the world and so on.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in that process, along that way, you know, one of the struggles with an extrusion company, especially in anodizing back then, was door hollows and streaking. You know, and we certainly had a lot of metallurgists that worked in Bonnell that were really smart people, and we had a lot of die makers and correctors and things like that. But, you know, probably the biggest issue in Bonnell and, you know, the other parts of the industry was actually streaking back then. Yeah. Okay. So I can remember right after Houghton bought Benchmark, you know, so this would have been 98, 99, somewhere like that. Ernie Witham hadn't retired yet, but he came in with this beautiful piece of metal. Probably the best piece of anodized product I'd ever seen at the time. And it was from China. Okay. And it was mechanically etched. Yeah, so it was coming from China, and it was using some sort of blasting media. I can't remember at the time if it was stainless steel or sand or corn husk or whatever, but it was as uniform a piece of material that we had seen, right? So so I went to China with a group of people from Houghton that Thad had put together at Pat Creaky. You know, your boss, Mark, John Ledeen, was one of those that was on that trip with me. And we went in and evaluated. We looked at 3 or 4 different plants in China that had the mechanical etch, because I think what Morris and Thad wanted to do was they had just bought Benchmark, and they were looking for a unique or competitive advantage, something that was new to the industry. So they had brokered this deal, in essence, to go over there and look at the plants. But what we found out, we came back, we tried to justify it, right? We spent about 3 years trying to justify it, maybe longer. But from a labor point of view, and also just the the physical footprints of a plant, we just never could, we could never do it. And it wasn't us, it was pretty much everybody that went on that trip.
Mhm.
You know,
You're talking about putting a process in of whether it was a shot blast. It wasn't. A
yeah.
chemical?
So what Houghton wanted to do, they were trying to broker a deal with the suppliers of the
Mhm.
equipment and the media,
Okay.
you know, and become a reseller for them,
Sure.
you know, trying to expand their footprint. But, and, you know, Thad came to all the plants and talked to us about it. But, you know, we just never could, we could just never justify it. So we just lived with the extrusion streaks,
Right.
you know,
Okay.
10% rejects or whatever they were back in the day.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So this went on for a couple of years, and Mark, you might remember this. This was a period of time that when China was really starting to cut into the US market,
Mhm.
you know, the early 2000s, those type of things.
Mhm.
And Bonnell actually, you know, said, okay, if we can't beat them, we have to try to join them a little bit here. So they started brokering for a Chinese extrusion company.
Mhm.
Yeah. So what would they do is they would actually, you know, bid things in for Bonnell, but source some of it from China.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
So one of the first, you know, one of the first big bids they got was the Death Star, the Dallas Cowboys' new stadium,
Right.
right? And that was supposed to be extruded and, you know, beautifully etched in China and shipped directly to Dallas with the Bonnell label on it.
Oh.
But it's
Yeah.
funny thing happened on the way to the Death Star. The accountants in China that were over that company, you know, took the whatever millions of dollars they had and left.
Oopsie.
What?
Yeah. So we had a job with a beautiful satin finish on it that we had no way of meeting in the United States, you know, and it was a special alloy. So Dave Asher and I went to Morris and said, we need you to develop something that we can that's got a matte finish on it, right? And we didn't tell him, we didn't necessarily tell him the sense of urgency, you know, but we you know, Morris and Linda and Tony and Richard Mon and some others, you know, started working on the acid etch for us.
Ah.
Yeah. I'll pause there if you got any questions or.
Gosh, no, it's just like this odyssey of like all these things happening that I just had no idea there was all this, like, it all just stemmed from like this one thing.
Oh, it gets better, George.
Oh, really? Really? Well, please continue, sir.
Yeah. So we worked probably 18 months. And I was in Noonan by then, right? So I was going back and forth to Alpharetta, and we would go up there and we go, you know, Morris, this is good, but it's too flat.
Okay.
We can't sell it, right? So we finally got a process that we thought would work, and ideally Kentland had gotten out of the bright dip business. So Kentland actually had 4 tanks kind of off to the side. Mark, I don't know if you ever remember, you know, kind of that back corner where the bright dip line was. So we put in the acid etch and we ran that job, and that was the first architectural job in the United States. It was with acid etch.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
And that was that was done in Kentland.
That was done in Kentland, Indiana.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Now, you know, Morris, knowing that they had a product to sell, and, you know, Dave Asher was really smart about this because, you know, there's people that said, well, we need to get an exclusive agreement or whatever. But Dave Asher said, you know, we don't. We actually need to help get this in the market if it's going to succeed, because this is going to help everybody. So while Kentland was the first to run a project, Bonnell was certainly not the first to expand, you know, in whatever their 3 or 4 plants they had into acid etch. But back in the early days of acid etch, because I was friends with Andy Joslowitz up at Line Tech, and
Yeah.
you know, we'd gone up there. They had put it in the pilot line. International Extrusions down in Texas and California were another one, and Architectural Metals in St. Louis. Those, we were the first 4 that actually put acid etch in. And I got to tell you, it was actually International Extrusions, and George, you know them. They were actually the first that said, okay, we're not only putting this in, we're going full board with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Bonnell was already, though, they had it in their Kentland plant, right?
But we only ran it for that select job at the time, Mark. So
Gotcha.
I then my last job at Bonnell was to try to justify and integrate this into all the locations.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And I probably got thrown out of Ira's office 8 times. You know, and what Ira's kept saying the whole thing was, we can't, it'll never sell. It's too flat. There's no market for it. We've got this catalog out there. It's too hard.
Sure.
You know, and I worked with Andy Massey. I worked with Mike Jones and with Duncan and with Ira. And eventually they saw the light. So my last project with Bonnell was actually implementing it into all of the Kentland, into all of the Bonnell facilities. And then, and Thad and Morris hired me because I had the experience. I had the knowledge of the acid etch, and I knew it. And I had a knowledge of the anodizing, and I had a knowledge of the extrusion, and I knew how to justify it. So that's why. But you know, it took a long time after that for the market to really catch hold. But certainly with International Extrusions and now Bonnell on board, that's when you started to see the ramp up of acid etch. And once Bonnell went, you know, a lot of people started to go.
So what was the major benefit they saw?
Well, the first thing is it just almost eliminated extrusion streaking issues. You know, because Bonnell, along with others, were in the architectural market, and especially those door hollows. You know, we would just run them and scrap them, because a lot of those times, you know, the mag silicide was underneath the surface, and you wouldn't see it until after you caustic etched it. Right. So it was just a nightmare to try to do that. So the biggest cost justification was the reduction of scrap and rework.
Scrap, right.
Yeah. But then
go ahead.
Go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to ask you, could they also change their extrusion practices, maybe to get more pounds per hour off the press or greater yield?
So Duncan Crowdis wrote a great paper at the AAC. I still have a copy of it. I'll be glad to send to you.
Wow. Okay.
Well, saying this is not a free pass. Okay. This is not a free pass. You still have to have good extrusion processes, right? So there was no justification in my project of press speed, but what we did put in there was actually being able to take the metal out of the dies.
Okay.
So because if you're an extrusion plant, a lot of times you might have sold the anodizing by the surface square foot, but you might have sold the extrusion by the pound. Right. And so you adjusted the dies to be able to take off that, because of the 3% that anodizing removed in caustic etching. So when you started looking at these big extrusion plants that, you know, extruded millions of pounds, it was actually a big number.
So what you're saying is the acid etch process didn't remove as much metal, aluminum, as the caustic etch process did.
It was about 10%.
And then you had greater hiding power. So if you sold it by the pound, your yields went up.
Yep.
And your recovery went up because you're not scrapping because of flow lines, die lines.
And I think, Mark, this is really what changed the industry to make anodizing the volume it is today.
Right.
If you remember back in the day, it was very seasonal. It was up and down a bit, but with the improvement in the finish of anodizing, I think you've seen a tremendous uptake in anodizing business.
And we hear that it looks like there's more opportunities just developing out there as anodizing as a finish is gaining a foothold in certain markets.
Yeah, so over the years, as others followed suit, the old Castles of the world, and the Line Techs of the world, and probably the big one was Conair. It's now an established finish in America. It doesn't happen overnight, but over the last 10 or 12 years, it certainly has.
Sure. So we have a certain segment of our audience that's in the architectural business, but if you're not an architectural anodizer, let's say you're a true job shop anodizer, 8-foot, 6-foot, 10-foot tanks, what would acid etch do for them in that where you have a whole realm of alloys and finishes that you're doing? Any benefit?
Well, there is, George can certainly speak to the anodizing of mixed alloys, so I'll leave that for him. But as far as the acid etched of mixed alloys, it certainly makes it easier. I'm not going to say it's perfect. I get customers even recently as last week, Mark, asking me how mixed alloys can how they etch and those type of things, right? So it's not perfect, but it certainly makes it a lot closer. And it's actually made some alloys that we would have never anodized before a lot more feasible, right? So the guy with the 10-foot job shop tank, he's probably not dedicating his finish, and he might not be quoting that specifically, but he certainly would have to match, if he's doing corner pieces or handles or whatever with what the architectural has done. And we've seen that trickle down effect over the last 5 years, I'd say.
Have you found that acid etch gives you more consistency as it relates to color?
So I'll give you two examples of that. So one of the things my old boss told me at Bonnell when we were putting in the project is he wanted a gloss range of between all 4 facilities of plus or minus 1. So we had a target. He had a target of, let's say, 8. And he said, I wanted to walk into Indiana, I wanted to walk into Georgia, I wanted to walk into Tennessee or wherever, and I want to be able to put a gloss meter on it so that and find that plus or minus 1 on there. Because I want to be able to mix and match business as needed out of there. So that was one of the things right off the bat that we had to establish the procedure for that. And that's why the Quaker Houghton procedure of today kind of stemmed from that. Is we had a customer in Bonnell right off the bat that drove us to make sure it was better. Okay. And then the second example I'll give you is when I was traveling overseas for Houghton at the time. Some of you might know I spent some years in Australia and Southeast Asia, and we had Sapa, who was a customer in the United States, wanted to do some of the solar panels they were doing in Portland, Oregon. They wanted to in India, and we had to go to India and try to match within 1 degree of what was coming out of Portland, Oregon. A completely different continent, right, and stuff like that. And we were able to do that as well. So that was kind of like oh wow. Those were 2 oh wow moments for me.
Right. you're talking about a gloss range of ±1, so that's definitely going to help with perception of color. Then you're talking about different plants, different countries,
Yeah,
and bringing that all together.
yeah.
That's a challenge in itself.
I've spent a lot of time in India. It was an interesting experience for sure.
Would you do it again?
Yeah, I miss India. People
Oh, really?
people ask me what do I miss the most about my travels globally, and
Mhm.
it's India.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why?
Because it's like nowhere else I've ever been in my entire life. And I've been a few places. I mean,
Right.
the people, the culture, the food,
Mm-hmm.
the pollution, the beauty, the history. It's, I mean, I'm just not finding elephants along the side of the road in Lafayette, Indiana.
That's true.
You know?
Yeah,
I don't have monkeys trying to pick my pocket, you know, because I got a cookie in there.
So, Dan, one of the things we wanted to talk about today was just the beginning evolution of the acid etch process in North American market. And you've laid it out beautifully. But what haven't we captured?
Well, I think there certainly would be nuances in there
Right.
that people could fill in other than me, because I was in Australia for 4 years,
Right.
and part of that actually expanded by then. So if you probably want to fill that gap, you probably need to, find somebody else that, might have been a little bit closer to it in those 4 years. Because by the time I came back from Australia, it was full on.
Mm-hmm.
And that would have been in 2015, and I left in 2010. So that was by 5 years. It was like, wow.
Did our Australian friends realize the benefits that you saw here in the US?
Yes and no. That's probably for a different podcast. And the global opportunities to be able to get acid etch into some of the other locations.
Okay. All
Okay.
right. Let's make a note of that.
But what I found when I came back was, it had expanded into Canada. It wasn't just America by then, so we had penetrated into Canada and somewhat into Mexico as well. You hear different numbers of what the acid etch number is today as far as percentage. I don't know if anyone's done any marketing on it, but it's certainly a big number, but there's certainly more opportunity as well. But
go ahead.
The other thing I see is customers trying to really experiment with their acid etch now to try to see what other kinds of unique finishes they can get with it, whether it's on a unique color or trying to, brighten it up a little bit, but still have the matte finish. And those are exciting as well.
Mm-hmm. Sure. If you're an anodizer listening to this and you wanted to explore putting an acid etch tank in your line, what would you need? What are the parameters to set up a tank in your line?
Well, it's certainly easier, Mark, if you're building a new line. I can't imagine anybody in today's world building a new line that's at least not leaving room to be able to expand in the acid etch. Going back to some of the challenges from 2005 to 2010 or whatever that number was you had the established lines that were designed with traditional caustic etch anodizing that didn't necessarily have space to be able to retrofit basically an acid etch tank and a rinse tank into the middle of their line. There was just no space. So us on the Houghton and the Quaker Houghton team, along with the customers, had to become very creative in many ways. But, you certainly would want to have, tanks that could withstand the chemistry. You certainly would want to have something with air extraction, and with today's permitting, you're going to have to look at the permitting for the water and for the air as well.
Okay. Heating, cooling?
No, it's not really exothermic.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, you might, if you have a big enough volume, you might want to look at some sort of you know, automated system, you know, to be able to get the powder into a liquid and the liquid into a day tank, and you know, dose it in. That's probably what the best people are doing today.
Do you have any experience with secondary versus prime extrusion?
Well, yeah, I mean, back in the day, Bonnell was almost all secondary,
Mhm.
right? So that was one of that was one of the things that, you know, right away that we were able to do was be able to use secondary billet, which was more susceptible to streaking, and be able to cover it. And you know, there's a lot of people that use prime as well. Now, there's people that might try to get down with a microscope and try to tell you there's a difference in the shade or the lightness between secondary and primary, but it's I don't know. I've got a pretty good eye for it, and I can't. I'm not convinced.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any how about 7,000, 2,000 series? Any work on that?
Yeah, 7,000 is not something that we've done enough work on, but the few trials I've seen, that's probably the one alloy that I haven't seen where we've been able to. We can get it more matte, but people are trying to match 7,000 to 6,000, and I haven't seen where we've been able to do that yet. I don't know if our lab has done any more on that area, but you know, we've tried it 2 or 3 years ago, and I didn't see where it could do it.
Anything on the casting side? You know, your die castings, 380, 356. Is there a way that it could brighten castings?
Brighten them?
Yeah, right, because you don't, there's not much aluminum in like even a 380. And there was somebody years ago that, oh, you put this chemical in, it's going to make your 380 just look beautiful. It's just like, okay.
I suppose if you had a good enough, strong enough cleaner to begin with,
Right.
you know, you might be able to see some positive results for 380, but I think that's kind of untapped territory. You know, that I think the one area, you know, we've seen with acid etch on casting and also on extrusions is on actually, yeah, you know, adhesion. You know, we've actually been able to see some pretty good adhesion results, you know, using acid etch.
Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of where we're, you know, trying to take a little bit of that.
All right. Do you mind if we make a left here and get into the mind of Dan Bishop?
Do you really want to, Mark?
Well, I'm scared. All right.
No, it'll be fine.
What do you think, George? What do you think?
It'll be fine. It's always nice to get into the weeds with Dan Bishop.
Yeah, there you go.
There we go. All right. So what would you tell someone that's just starting out in the anodizing industry about the opportunities, the road ahead?
So just so I'm clear, is that someone that's, you know, investing in an anodizing line, or is it
Not
someone
investing.
someone that's gone to work in an anodizing plant?
That's it. That's working right now in the anodizing plant or a horizontal paint line, and they're hanging parts on it, right? What would you tell them?
It's not Apple, it's not glamorous, but it certainly can open a lot of opportunities in your life if you're willing to make them, to work at it. You know,
Right.
I didn't even know what anodizing was. You know, I was an art guy, right?
Right.
But now I look at it from an artistic, creative point of view, and some of the things they're doing with anodizing and art's pretty interesting as well.
Oh, it is, right?
Yeah.
So what's one that's like caught your eye recently, or at all, really?
You know, some of the stuff they're doing in Australia and California, as far as screen prints on the anodizing, and then they're using different types of etches to create like this change in time of the lightness darkness of the aluminum.
Ooh, that's cool.
Yeah, and then they're using like you silk screen different dyes into it. There's some pretty good stuff out
Oh,
there.
neat.
Yeah.
Huh.
You're absolutely right. And then how about that process where they dip it in and then they bring it out and they get different colors, or is it the oil that they're putting on the tank or
Right.
something?
Right.
Yeah. Those are pretty, all right. So that was a good answer, Dan, right? 'Cause
Thank you.
you never know where you're gonna go. And look at
Right.
you. You're
Exactly.
a boiler maker, right?
Well, actually, my grandma never could understand this. I went to Purdue, but I'm a Notre Dame fan.
That's okay.
That's right.
Because
Fighting Irish.
as I told grandma, I was a Notre Dame fan long before I went to Purdue.
Gotcha. And you also root for the Cubs, right?
The White Sox, come on, Mark.
Jeez. All right. Fair enough.
And
So
the
what do you
Bears,
do?
and the Bears,
Who?
the Chicago Bears.
Yeah. Still say who? Okay.
Yeah.
Right. What do you when you're not involved in anodizing, what do you do to relax, to get away from it?
I listen to avant-garde music, jazz and classical avant-garde music, and I study art.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you go to art museums when you're on the road or when you're at downtime?
Almost any time that I can get a couple hours,
Oh, wow.
I'll find a local art museum or gallery, and certainly when I'm traveling on vacation, I will seek it out. Yep. So
Have you been to the Walker?
I have been to the Walker several times.
Well, you have.
Yeah,
All
I've
right.
seen
I haven't yet.
I've seen VJ Iyer, one of my favorite jazz pianists, play there, and I've certainly gone to many different installations in the Walker Art Gallery. The thing about the Walker that's great, and I think Akron did some work on the Walker,
Yep.
is it's a gallery, so there's no permanent collection. It's like rotating shows through there all the time. They've got 7 different galleries, and some of it's very provocative, and some of it's just beautiful. It's
Sure.
and they have like 1,000 different films in there. You can go in on Thursday night and view them for free.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know that. It's on the list though. Dan, if you could, where would you go back? Where's the place that you'd like to go to?
Well, Mark, I just went back to Australia for 3 weeks, so that
Fair enough.
That's where you were.
Yeah, that's where I was, George, right? So we just went back to Melbourne, and then we went down to Tasmania as well, and up to Sydney.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
That must have been nice.
Yeah, Tasmania, ironically, in Hobart, has one of the best art museums in the world down there. It's called the MoMA. Museum of Old and New Art, and it's like nothing I've ever seen before. And then Tasmania also has the cleanest air in the world.
Really?
Yeah. So it was, yeah.
That's something worth checking out.
Yeah, it was nice. We did some boat trips and some hiking, and so yeah, I would say Australia was definitely.
Fair enough. How involved are you in the AAC?
So pretty involved on different levels, right? So, first of all, Quaker Houghton is a sponsor, so we have a booth, and so we're certainly involved there. And then, several of us within the company, we sit on different committees, and I sit on a couple as well.
Right. If you're an anodizer and you're not involved in the AAC, why?
Yeah, I don't know why. I think some people think there's not a benefit to them. I think, that people will go, but if they don't feel like they can take something back that can help their plant, that, then it's, is it value to continue to send somebody every year when, the people that are running plants right now are struggling to find people.
Yeah.
So it can be hard to take people off the floor. So I think that's probably one of the reasons why is, just having enough pertinent information to help an anodizer. And unfortunately, one of the things that would help an anodizer is how to rack, and how to rack fast and efficient. And
Right.
you know, those are few and far as far as solutions come.
Oh, yeah.
So you've been to the annual conferences. You've been to several of them, right?
I've been to almost 75% of them in the last
Sure.
20
Sure.
years. Yeah.
Have you had customers approach you while you were there and talk about different solutions to an issue they might be having?
Sure. I mean, that's a place where, you know, we have a lot of customers come,
Mhm.
right? So, and whether it's my customer or it's, you know, Cena's customer or somebody else's customer within Quaker Houghton, we all kind of know each other, right? So it's very common for someone that may not be my customer directly to actually just approach me or sit in one of the discussions that, you know, George or Nathan might be giving, and, you know, kind of talk to them through it with it while it's going on.
Sure, sure. Possibly even bring parts or something like that to, you know, show you and discuss through it.
For sure.
So if the why is because the why not maybe is, you know, you just can't find people, so everyone's taxed in your operation. But then the networking and the information you get on the floor to solve issues could have a dramatic positive impact on your business.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you know, I went into a plant today, and I would say 50% of the people I didn't recognize because they were all just so new.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's the challenge with how does the organizations train and maintain their people, especially in the key areas of racking. And, you know, not everyone has an automated crane system, right? So there's a lot of people out there with manual hoists. And they continually need to know how and why to do things.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the AAC can certainly help with some of that, but getting the people from the plants there can be difficult, right? I understand the conferences in Seattle this year, and you know that's a long way from someone in North Carolina to send somebody, you know, for 3-4 days away, right? So those are the challenges, and it's not just the AAC; it would be other industries as well.
That's right. So as we start winding down, Dan, is there anything that you'd like to share with us in the end here?
Well, I think I've told you quite a bit, right?
Yes.
You know, I'll tell you a little bit personally about myself, I guess, if you don't mind, Mark.
No, go.
You know, so my wife and I she's Filipino. We've been married for 9 years, and before that, I was married and had 3 children. Those three children are grown, and I have 5 grandchildren.
5
Oh,
grandchildren.
Yeah,
Wow.
all the way from 3 years old to 18 years old.
oh, wow.
Well, this is what happens when you have kids young, George.
Get it done early, right? Get that out of the way.
Yeah, but yeah, that's just a little bit about me.
Yeah.
Personal.
Yeah. How often do you get to see your grandchildren?
Not too often. One of them lives in Florida, and 2 live in Arizona, and 2 live in South Dakota.
Okay.
So, you know, they have their lives, and you know, when we can see them, we see them.
You see them. Absolutely right.
Because I haven't always been in the country either. So, you know.
Right. Exactly. Are they all Bears fans, or you know?
They have no reason to be Bears fans. Right? You know,
I know if you had some influence.
No. They have their own life. I think a couple of them are Arizona Cardinals fans, but they would have no tie back. They would have no tie back to the Midwest, right? So.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, Dan, if folks have questions about anodizing, acid etch, how can they reach out and contact you?
Probably email is fine.
Okay.
Dan.Bishop with 2 P's. Make sure you get the 2 P's on the end at QuakerHoughton.com.
There we go. Are you on LinkedIn as well?
I am on LinkedIn.
So that'd be another avenue as well.
Yep.
Okay.
Those would be the 2.
Dr. O, what do you say?
I say this has been just a great history lesson, and just, sort of hearing about how a career goes and getting some insight into, what happens to a person through the life, and how do you grab those opportunities, right?
Yeah. Classic. I mean, everything Dan talked about today was always grabbing the next, getting on and moving on forward.
It's because I had 2 excellent interviewers.
Nice job, Dan. Well, we appreciate everyone listening today, and look for us to have another podcast coming up in the near future. Appreciate your time, and thank you for listening to Anno Talk, all things anodizing. All right. Outstanding. Thank you.
See ya. Take care, guys.
All right. Good deal. Thanks so much, Dan.
You're welcome.